In this box, I have the key to unlocking the future of civilization. Or this is a 96 core rack mount machine from Falcon Northwest. Threadripper, of course. For me. If you've never heard of Falcon Northwest, I can give them no proper introduction. They're on my radar because they built an overclocked Xeon workstation that was seriously impressive to me. That was pretty exciting. 56 cores of fire-breathing madness. AMD's got the 96 core processor, and this is a similar workstation, but in a rack mount configuration. There's TRX 50 and there's WRX 90. This is actually a TRX 50 configuration, which is 4 memory channels. I think if you're going to splash out for that 96 core CPU, you probably want to go for the WRX 90 platform, but I'm impatient, and this is available now, so here we go. When you get it, you get this helpful unpacking guide showing you the magnetic dust filter, and you can put rubber feet on it, or you can do slide rails. Now, rack mount might conjure the wrong thing in your mind.
So we decided, what? I can't hear you. I'm filming.
Oh. Yes, those machines are rack mount, but this is more like living room home theater rack mount, whisper quiet, than server closet rack mount. Now this chassis is no ordinary rack mount chassis. This is made of a very thick steel. It is a very sturdy configuration. This 4U rack chassis configuration, in addition to the front magnetic dust filter, you also have 2 full-size 5¼ inch drive bays for adding accessories like our IC dock, U.2 hot swap bays, whatever you want. There's also an additional 2.5 inch drive hidden, so if you wanted to run something like our Kioxia CM7 in this chassis, you totally could do that. Now for GPU loadout, you can go 4090, you can go RTX 6000. In my case, I'm going to go dual RTX 6000. But the cabling is quite a bit simpler. If you're going to go with the 600 watt 4090 power connector, it's just, that's all there is to worry about. Well, once again, Falcon Northwest shows us how it's done. I mean, out of the box, their Cinebench score is over 100,000. Our TDP on the CPU, keep in mind, is 350 watts, even the 96 core. 32, 64, 96 cores is 350 watts. So it's progressively more power efficient. And the power efficiency on this is just absolutely bonkers. I mean, yes, I have a Seasonic 1600 watt power supply in this chassis, but it's really to run the 2 RTX 6000 GPUs more than anything, because my platform configuration here is 350 watts. As configured, you've got Kingston DDR5 registered error correcting memory, 128 gigabytes. But this platform supports up to 1 terabyte, with 256 to 512 gigabytes being reasonably priced. Those 128 gig DIMMs are going to cost you $2,500 to $3,000 each. But that will get you to 1 terabyte if you get 4 of them. Max single thread turbo that I've seen just doing everyday workloads, 5.2 gigahertz on a 96 core processor. Our all-core boost here is 4.5 to 4.6 gigahertz. Granted, that's kind of a best-case scenario. I mean, Cinebench. Depends on the benchmark you run, but still, that's darn impressive. Rendering and working at the same time. So I'll use these 32 cores for doing my work, and then I'll have 64 cores busy in the background rendering. That's the thing you can do now. But this thing's the size of a pizza box. Okay, 3 pizza boxes stacked on top of one another. And this is probably the kind of workstation on which general artificial intelligence is going to be invented. There's going to be a sole proprietor billion-dollar company, and this is what the founder of that company is probably going to use. Something like this. They're not renting something in the cloud. This is the 3rd Falcon Northwest system that I've reviewed that makes me question everything, because it is so well built, so small and quiet for what it is. The cooling configuration is what it needs to be, the power situation is what it needs to be, the expansion slots and expandability are what they need to be. You got 2 5¼ inch bays, you can do a lot with that. Plus you got more room than that internally. Without it being super crammed, this is really a marvel of careful planning and figuring out what customers would like to have. This really wouldn't be out of place in a living room. 96 cores in your living room though, would be one heck of a media server. Even sitting here running Cinebench for 10 minutes, our worst case CPU temperature was only 69 degrees C. Partly that's because the cooling solution in this system is amazing, and partly that's because the heat load is very, very spread out on that 96 core CPU. So in terms of how hot the surface of the CPU gets versus the physical area, the 96 core is the best case scenario for cooling. 32 core, on the other hand, that's a worst case scenario because you physically have a smaller, lower number of dies that are on the CPU, and so those cores are the ones that get the hottest. I can say that and I can explain it all day, but then experiencing it in this box in front of me is... I'm filled with a sense of childlike wonder. I don't know how else to explain it. Santa has come early this year. And this is the very same Asus motherboard that I dumped north of 1,000 watts into when I was testing the 64 core Threadripper. So I know the motherboard is going to be pretty solid. And I know that I'm not going to have any training issues or other problems if I do decide to opt for, server memory of a density of 64, 128 gigabytes per DIMM, rather than our Kingston Fury DDR5 registered error correcting memory, which is really very impressive in this configuration. 192 threads. What's the obvious fun thing that you can do with that? I don't know, play Doom on Task Manager. And it turns out a lot of the old videos that did that were fake, but Mark Russinovich at Microsoft actually wrote a program that would let you display a bitmap in Task Manager. But this is really funny. When I run the program, it didn't work, and I was like, that's really weird. And I tried to run the program again to figure out exactly why it doesn't work. And in the code, it says, oh, this system only has 64 CPUs. And that's because this system actually has 192 threads in a single NUMA node, and Windows doesn't really support that. And so the actual programming API is wildly inconsistent, because it's like, oh, well, there's one NUMA node, but then if you don't do it correctly, it's 64 threads. And so it's just a dirty, dirty hack that it still works this way, probably for legacy compatibility, because it really is one logical group of processors. You just have 192 threads and a lot of internal Windows stuff. Nobody ever thought you would have more than 64 cores in a single node. I mean, we've been on the trajectory for 10 years, and still the Windows internals are on the struggle bus with more than 64 threads. It's fun stuff. It's no wonder when you run some of these really high core count programs that things tend to look a little better on Linux than Windows. You could run an NPS4 mode, which would give you 4 NUMA nodes. There's also a way to configure 3 NUMA nodes just to split it up into 32 core, 64 thread partitions, which is also not a bad idea. The opinions are my own, but the coffee, that's Falcon's. It's pretty good. I was a little surprised by some of the results that we got here because, well, okay, yeah, some of it is down to the fact that this is 96 cores, obviously, and some of it is down to the, even with 96 cores, the power efficiency here really is something incredible. It's unique on the planet that you can get this much performance out of so little power. 96 cores by default 350 watt power envelope. But as with all things, Falcon does actually provide a Falcon and a Falcon OC BIOS profile. More on that in a second. Not just down to the processor, it's also down to the specific memory kit and memory loadout. That's our Kingston Fury Beast DDR5. The default loadout that Falcon sent me was 128 gigabytes. I also loaded up the system with 256 gigabytes just to be able to run COMSOL and some of our other really high-end benchmarks. But 64, 128, and 256 gig DIMMs, those are really only server variety, and this is DDR5 6000, specifically tuned with an Expo profile to really dovetail nicely with the new Threadripper high-end desktop and WRX 90 coming soon platform. It's also worth noting that my RTX 6000 layout is a little different than how Falcon Northwest would ship this. Part of that is because I'm doing the PCIe Gen 5 storage experimentation. It's actually really hard to find a PCIe card that has redrivers. Right now, you're better off using an M.2 to a 38 pin or EDSFF that has the Gen 5 redriver and also Gen 5 cabling. It can be a little tricky to find Gen 5 cabling, but right now it's easier to find the Gen 5 cabling and connectors than it is the PCIe cards for whatever reason. So if you are going to go absolutely monstrous storage configuration with lots of Gen 5 storage, it's going to be a little bit of an adventure, but Falcon Northwest does have really fast, qualified storage solutions based on Gen 4 and Micron storage solutions and other storage configurations that are an option for you. So be sure to check those out. So what's the benchmark breakdown with 96 cores? Well, 96 cores is a little bit of a trade-off, right? You got way more cores. The boost in the base clock is a little bit lower because you've got way more cores. But if you're buying 96 cores, you're buying it for rendering and background tasks and Blender. Blender is where this really shows. Casually out of the box, scoring over 1,000 points in Monster, that's achievable with the 96 core Threadripper Pro. And this is even before we add in things like the higher end WRX90 platform that has more memory channels. This is 4 memory channels on the Asus Sage TRX50. Same with Cinebench. We can just step right on up from over 100,000 to 105,000 or even 150,000 with PBO. Now the scores actually did vary quite a bit. Our Silverstone AIO cooler is pretty much the best AIO cooler that you can get for the setup. So of course, that's part of our Falcon Northwest build. And with PBO turned on, that really lets the 96 core monster sing. That's the point of 96 cores, isn't it? You can have all kinds of crazy background tasks running and be running a bunch of stuff in the foreground, and it doesn't really matter. So if you look at the scores in the benchmarks for things like Adobe Premiere and After Effects and Photoshop and that sort of thing, the 96 core doesn't seem to do as well as its 32 and 64 core counterparts. And that's just because a lot of these tests are not really super well optimized for running on 96 cores. Now there are Adobe After Effects plugins that will use 96 cores depending on the visual effects and everything else that you're doing, but it's very, very difficult to benchmark that. So if you're going to buy a 96 core system, chances are you've done your homework. Even more modern applications like SolidWorks, where work has been done to use the more modern internal Windows plumbing to handle more than 64 threads on a NUMA node, you don't really have a tremendous performance bump from 64 to 96 cores, except for the 96 core machine is not nearly as busy, so you can be running a lot of other tasks. If you get somebody a 96 core workstation and you're running renders and stuff in the background, would they still be able to use it as a workstation? Probably. I don't know that I recommend that use case, but probably. Similarly with PC Mark X, because of the lower overall base and boost clocks of the 96 core, it doesn't show quite as well in the benchmarks, but nevertheless the performance of this machine is breathtaking because you've got 96 cores, 192 threads. For gaming and game development, you'll be pleased to know that at 4K, or in basically any situation where your GPU bottlenecked, the performance on this platform is basically identical to any modern platform. If we're talking about 1080p gaming, well, you're going to want to take a look at the Falcon Northwest Frag Box instead for just gaming. But for game development, again, the 32 and the 64 core Threadripper Pro are in a class of their own. The 96 core is right there, but it's a little behind the 64 and the 32 core owing to the fact that it has lower base and boost clocks. Now for our dual RTX 6000s, that enables a whole other suite of machine learning benchmarks and everything else that goes with that. I would encourage you to check out our other video, which coincidentally was also a Falcon Northwest system, our building our ultimate machine learning workstation. You can do that guide pretty much as is with the Windows subsystem for Linux and get full access to CUDA. Fun fact, more CUDA development is being done on the Windows subsystem for Linux interface today, 2023, beginning of 2024, than is being done natively in Windows. And that is because of the maturity, stability, and speed of the WSL, the Windows subsystem for Linux platform. Linux platform in general, but you can't get away from Windows in workstation contexts in a lot of corporate environments. And if you're a researcher at home and you're doing machine learning and this is like your work from home machine, or this is your I'm going to research stuff at home, your private system, then your preference might be that you're running Windows as the overall operating system and then the Windows subsystem for Linux for your machine learning. That's fine. If you follow that guide, this setup will work fabulously well with your RTX 6000 GPUs in a single or dual GPU configuration. That is no problem at all. And this chassis is quiet enough to run in your living room, which is really the shocking thing. The build quality here is something else. Silverstone cooler can easily deal with PBO values of 600-700 watts, no problem. And that's more than twice the rated TDP, the non-overclocked variant of this platform. It really is on a whole other level that Falcon Northwest was able to cram this much compute into such a physically small box with handles that are luggable. You can just carry your research somewhere and show them the AI that lives on the box. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we get AGI in the next 5 years, and it's probably going to be conceived of on a system just like this one. Well, that's been a quick look at the Falcon Northwest RAK system. 96 cores in such a compact package. Be sure to check out the configurations they offer on their website. Big thanks to them for sending this over in this configuration. It's pretty awesome. Also having a lot of fun with my frag box too. I'm going to have a lot more content on this coming up, so stay tuned for that. Or if you have any ideas for tests that you want to see on this rig, hit me up in the forum at Level 1 Techs. I'm Wendell, I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.